anything they can do to defend themselves from that topicality argument could feed your link to this argument. When the regulatory agency has to double back on what it's done before, then they get into trouble enforcing any of the other regulations that they have. What we did that year is our impact was that the EPA would have a hard time defending the Endangered Species Act. Now, we were really playing with fire there because it turns out there's a ton of evidence that says that the Endangered Species Act is bad, and we would be just as well suited to let the thing die. But we did not run into any of the teams that were strapped to have that debate. Instead, we used that disadvantage, the regulatory politics disadvantage, in debating, I guess, Northwestern ran a new affirmative against us, the second or third Northwestern team, and we went for that in the 2NR, and that's what we won on. So it was actually a good time investment. So I think you might be able to have a topicality argument that requires the affirmative to make use of what the EPA is already doing, or at least have some impact on the EPA's current administration of its policies, and then, to go along with it, the EPA politics, the regulatory politics disadvantage. Now, there are other EPA disadvantages as well. There are funding trade-off arguments within the EPA's budget. There are personnel and human resource trade-off arguments. There was, in the case list, I was looking over one of the case lists from that year. I forget which program it was, but one of the teams had a trade-off argument that said that the EPA has indoor air quality as currently a very low priority, and it's fully funded it because of political pressure, but it's always trying to pull those resources back. And they were running that argument as indoor air quality regulations that have to do with sick building syndrome and smoking indoors and things like that, those have the potential to save thousands or even millions of lives. And if the affirmative trades off with that, you get a couple of dings on their significance and their solvency, and then you're winning that disadvantage. And it's a real simple, real intuitive argument. The internal link is not very complicated. It's a straightforward trade-off, and the impact is easy to understand and easy to accept. It's not a nuclear war. It's an argument that could get you a lot of mileage in a lot of debates. So if you can lock the affirmative into doing something that falls within the EPA's purview, then that may be something that's strategically valuable. So you may want to go looking for that. A couple of other things that I remember from that particular environment topic. We talked during the summer, and we actually did not go ahead with researching federalism and a state's counterplan because we didn't think it was going to be that useful. And later on, we looked back and we realized that was our biggest mistake. Because, in particular, at the beginning of the year, it was Michigan and Emory, but Dartmouth also picked it up, and there were a number of teams where the state's counterplan and federalism was just about their mainstay. We were really surprised at how well that strategy does in this particular subject matter. And so even though I'm on record as saying it wouldn't bother me at all if the state's counterplan and the federalism debate were to fall off the face of the earth, I have every sympathy with the negative on this topic. So a generic that really works, if you've got a good federalism file, a good state's counterplan, and if you debate in front of a judging population that's willing to accept counterplans, especially a counterplan that's not really that radical, saying the states should do it instead of the federal government, that's kind of a perennial issue, controversy taken up at the heart of a lot of current events and political science debates in the real world, then that's something that you might want to fall back on. And, interestingly, if you counterplan with have the states do it, then the regulatory politics EPA disadvantage and the EPA resource trade-off disadvantage, those are also net benefits to the counterplan. I also think that you are going to have to get into the politics debate, and that's the kind of thing that, you research it week to week, you see which proposals are being fought over by the Republicans and the Democrats, which ones is Obama trying to put his gravitas, whatever he has, behind, and then you look in all the political commentary for what are people saying is going to happen for this to pass. Does there need to be bipartisan cooperation? Does one side or the other need to muster all of their political chips and pull off a big win? And can you win that introducing a big change in environmental policy right now would be enough of a stumbling block that it would derail it? That's the kind of thing that you can do a little bit of digging in political science journals and in political science texts written recently, but you're really a lot better off just becoming a junkie of political commentators. And it might even get you into where you have to start reading blogs, to where you're reading Talking Points Memo and Fire Dog Lake and so forth. And then you might have to hammer out, are we going to be able to defend blog postings as legitimate evidence? Will the judges that we debate in front of, will they accept that kind of thing? But given how broad this topic is, I have to think that having a good political disadvantage, that's just a weapon that you need when you're in a situation like this and you really don't know what's coming at you. One other thing, the topic I've already said that we had required us to regulate business, and yours does not require that, so you don't want to stake your entire strategy on what are the negative effects of regulating business. But a number of affirmatives are going to regulate business. And most people's first instinct, whenever they have a topic like this, and what the affirmative has to do is, well, actually the affirmative can go either direction. They can either increase protection for environmental issues, or they could decrease it and call that a reform. Say that what exists in the status quo is actually too much protection to where it's irrational, to where we are stopping the building of housing that could help lots and lots of people because of some irrationally protected little snail darter. But in a lot of cases, affirmatives are going to do their research, and what they're going to find that they think is strategic, what they're going to find harm and solvency evidence for, is to regulate an industry that is producing something that's hurting the environment. What a lot of people want to do is they want to write a business confidence disadvantage right away. Because if you regulate business, if you put new regulations on business, then their confidence dries up, and they don't expand, and they don't hire, and they don't build new plants. And it's not a bad argument to write right now, while the economy is showing some shaky signs of recovery, because it really gets easy to say that the economy is kind of getting back up on its legs, but something tiny, something even as little as just a couple of new environmental regulations could topple what little confidence that businesses managed to build up. With all that said, describing that argument, and you need to be aware of that argument, and I bet you're going to hear that argument this year, what we found worked better. We gave up almost entirely on business confidence just a few tournaments into the year, and we turned instead to trade negotiations. Now, once again, I have not surveyed what's out there, but it's kind of a perennial problem with free trade negotiations that are ongoing, that we have different environmental standards from the rest of the world. And that is right up there with things like privacy, things like intellectual property, things like agriculture subsidies, as one of the huge, whenever it rears its head, it derails trade negotiations. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to dig around, and you're going to want to find what trade summits, what trade agreements are being hammered out, and with whom. And then see if you can't find some evidence that almost any time there are changes in the body of U.S. environmental regulations, that hamstrings the efforts to open up free trade with other countries. It's possible, if anything, I hate this counterplan more than I hate the state's counterplan, but it's possible you could wind up writing a consultation counterplan that was consult with our trade negotiating partners, with the other parties to whatever trade talks are going on. Run this regulation by them. And then, of course, you get into that whole thing, can you trap the affirmative into saying, oh, well, they would love our plan, so they'd say yes. Well, that's what we wanted to hear. That means the counterplan now does the plan, and that means we get all the advantage that you're claiming in the 1AC, but we also get the advantages of the fact that we consulted and you didn't. If all of this is sounding a little confusing to you, you can find some good online discussions of consultation counterplans. But if you have been knocking around the debate world for a while, consultation, I think, has a little bit of potential, especially in conjunction with a trade disadvantage. So, what you're going to have to do, because the topic subject matter is, pretty good, pretty timely, and I think if you ever get a handle on the topic to where you feel prepared the night before a tournament, you're going to enjoy having the debates. In that sense, this topic was well chosen. But in the sense of putting together the wording and crafting a topic that does what it needs to do as far as balancing ground between both sides and giving notice to both sides, wow, are you going to have to pull some tricks in order to get ready? And that's something that I'm sure you know, and I'm sure you're up against. But I think you ought to explore the EPA angle. I think that that's something that really might pay off. And what I plan to do as the weeks go by and as you get closer and closer to the season beginning is to post some more videos, especially if I stumble across some of the sources, some of the evidence that's going to help me make some of these arguments. So it could be with nationals just over and with the season, not that far behind you, that you want to take a couple of weeks, a couple of months and not even think about debate. But I have to think if you're watching this video, probably you've had your time off and you're ready to start thinking about it again. So I remember whenever we got a new topic, even when it was a topic we didn't like, it was the kind of thing that just made us excited, made us sort of fall in love with the activity all over again, and me especially, because for many years, the organization that I debated under, not NCFCA, but NDT, they would release their topic every year on my birthday. And so my joke was always it was their birthday present to me. So as you first start to dig into the literature and as you first start to see possibilities, I hope you'll have a good time with it. And I hope that when I make some more videos in the week to come that I can do something to help stir up your thinking in a productive fashion.